Welcome to another episode of Nuggets with Sauce, the podcast dishing up bite-sized insights you can sink your teeth into, served with a saucy take on common leadership challenges by your host, Michelle Arentz. Oh, wow. I am so excited here on another episode of Nuggets with Sauce. I am thrilled to have with me today Keith Willis. Keith, I have been looking forward to this conversation with you to share with our listeners and viewers for quite some time. The minute you and I connected, I was like, oh, this guy is so on the same page. He totally gets it. This is, I'm sure, going to be one of several conversations that you and I are going to share in the Nuggets with Sauce space, but we had to start somewhere, and today is that day, my friend. So I'm very excited to have you here. Now, as people who are following Nuggets with Sauce know, we do not use job titles here. So make an introduction, and I know you're a really good guy about this because you did your homework, which I am loving. But I would just love for you to first and foremost let our followers kind of get a little feel for what the heck is Keith Willis all about, in the sense of, you know, as I always like to put it, what fires you up, what's getting you out of bed in the morning? How are you making the world a better place without using your job title?
Thanks, Michelle. So I'm really excited to be here. Thank you for having me. Really been looking forward to our conversation. So obviously my name is Keith Willis, and one of the things I love to do is help people leverage their talents. Oftentimes I think about some of the people I've had the opportunity to work with and where they are in their careers, and really feel like that I've done a good job of helping them maximize their talent. Now, obviously the talent comes with it. They've already put in the hard work. They've done all of the right things. They just want somebody to give them a little bit of guidance, a little bit of a push, and help them get to the next level. So that's really what I help people do. That's a process. You know, wherever you are in any organization, a lot of times people think that development of people just happens. You just have to have some type of, yes.
Stop right there, sir.
So yeah, so it is a process. There are steps that have to be taken to make sure that you get people where they want to be. So that's really what gets me fired up. And it's one of the reasons why I started my own company, is to be able to help people leverage their talent and help other organizations leverage the talent that they have. It's really interesting because when you look at Gallup data, it always talks about how low engagement is. And over the years, that hasn't changed. Well, it changed a little bit during COVID. And I think that's because people were really happy to have a job and companies let them work from home.
Right, but that's in the rearview mirror now, man.
Oh, yeah. Well, things have gone not so well lately,
Yeah.
You pick up the newspaper anytime, literally a CEO is saying, hey, I want my people back in the office.
Yeah. I want my people this, I want my people that. And by the way, I'm, bitching and moaning about nobody wants to work, which I also don't buy. We're going to dig into that one too.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Just before we really dive into this one, just quickly too, I always love to ask folks, do you have a recommended read, watch, or listen that our thought leaders ought to know about?
So for me, it's Break All the Rules by Marcus Buckingham. I found that book fundamentally changed how I managed people. Now, I wish I could tell you that I read the book once and I got it, but it did take me some time. There
Right,
was
that process you were talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
Just watch the video or read the book and be experts. Let's face it, we'd all do it, and you and I'd be out of a job.
Oh, exactly. I had a sales representative so I spent most of my career in pharmaceuticals, and I was a district sales manager, and I had a representative that we'd spent the day together, and she was really struggling. And so at the end of the day, she looked at me and she said, I think I'm going to go home and cry. She was being a little facetious because we had a really good relationship. But it did hit me in a particular way because I was thinking, it's like, that's never good when your sales rep.
She could have said she chose that.
She chose that. And during the time I was reading Break All the Rules, and one of the focuses about Break All the Rules is focusing on what people do extremely well. And she was an extremely good sales representative. She struggled with her product knowledge. And so
Mhm.
the following day I asked her, I said, what is it that you do better than anybody? And she
Mhm.
said, I help paint pictures and help doctors understand who they should write for. And so I
Mhm.
told her that was what we were going to focus on for the day. And so
Right.
that was what we did. We focused on that skill set.
Mhm.
Now, that doesn't mean that I couldn't focus on her product knowledge, because when you're in pharmaceutical industry, being able to provide the right knowledge is very important.
Oh, yeah.
But, so ultimately, the reality of it is she was never going to be somebody that was going to be 100% or an A plus, A plus plus with product knowledge.
Right.
But if we got her to a C, then she was going to be okay.
Right.
And we were able to get her focused on what she did extremely well. And she ended the year over 100%. And so
Yeah.
that was the first lesson around focusing on what people do well
Right.
can give you the types of results that you're looking for and great performance.
Yeah, because I think as often as not, and it makes sense because we're kind of wired this way, I think, but we focus a lot on what people aren't, sometimes more than what they are, and it's like, oh, here's the 52 things you did wrong. And, here's all the not to do's. And, we see this all the time with, like, if anybody's bothering to do performance reviews, performance coaching, performance anything, which by the, whole other subject for conversation around who's not even doing that. But I think there's so much focus on the kind of you're not this, you're not that, it's not enough. And instead of, to your point, flip that on its head, break those rules and say, look, what are we doing in this space? What are you getting right? Where are you wonderful and shiny? How do we bring more of that to the forefront, as opposed to pounding on people about all the things they're never going to be? And it's both that self-realization, right? Like, I know I've been going through some realizations in my own in the last little bit about, I don't want to, I'm lucky because, I'm my own boss and she's pretty reasonable mostly. But like, if I had come to a realization, which I did, that I don't really shine over here, I'm not going to beat myself up over it. I'm lucky and I get to say, then maybe I don't do that anymore. I'll find somebody else, which I love that story that you're sharing. Like, how do you, from a leadership perspective, really recognize, and we all have that. We all have strengths and we all have things that we're not so great at. So how do we help ourselves and others know what that is? Like, let's get honest and recognize it. No, like, believe me, you don't want to come to me for anything to do with math or spreadsheets. Know your lane, know your strengths. And then how do we, think about celebrating and leveraging those? And I love what you're saying in the end with that shift in your focus with her. She was kicking it out of the park, right? Well, sorry, that was a mixed sports metaphor. Kicked it, I don't know, you could kick it out of the park.
Well, you
That's what
could.
you're good at. So you know what I mean? Love that. That's fantastic. Now, of course, we're going to dive into, I know you've got several nuggets that I hope we have time to unpack all today, but if we don't, we'll just regroup and carry on further. But any thought to the kind of sauce that you're bringing to the table today? Is there a particular kind of sauciness that goes with what you want to share? Are we getting
You
into
know,
sauce realm? Are we sweet and sour? Where are we at?
it's interesting when we get into the topic of management training,
Oh, yeah.
large or small, companies need to spend more money on manager training. In
Yeah.
fact,
Let's say we're going for hot sauce here, because this is a hot topic. And I don't know about you, but I get hot under the collar thinking about how we're not. And as you and I were saying before we really started this off, you said spend more money. And what did I say? Just spend some money, any money.
well,
Please.
I know some companies spend money only because I help stand up leadership development in a few places, but
You are getting hired in a few spots. So thank heaven every one of those. How many are missing the mark?
Yeah, exactly. So it is interesting because there's a market difference in organizations that spend money and time in management development versus those that don't. And it's large and small. So it's not just companies that on a shoestring budget, maybe have 50 people that don't have a lot of money. And the fact of the matter is you can do training without money if you do coaching and feedback, but a lot of companies don't even do that. So
No.
if you have a limited budget,
Yeah.
do you train a sales force? or your everybody, or do you do your managers? I always say your managers first,
Mhm.
because if you have a good management team, everything gets pushed down from there.
I was gonna say that's got to be okay. Let's just pause for a moment here. Let's just savor that nugget right there for just a second, because I think, there's probably some people listening to this who would be like, "Wait, what? What do you mean? You wouldn't? I mean, if you're on a tight budget, you've got limited scope to get anything done. Well, then of course, wouldn't I go after like train my salespeople? Because if I've got well-trained salespeople, then they're going to sell more stuff." But I love what you're saying in this space of nah, it's like get the managers and the leaders, and again, as folks here know, I use them interchangeably because they should be both. But I love that what you said, that no, you start by getting your managers right. This is like, okay, and again, follow the mind leap. This is like parenting. Put your marriage before, and it sounds counterintuitive. Like, what do you mean I don't put my children first? Listen, if you don't have a foundation in your relationship with your parent partner, who cares? Everything else falls off the rails, right? Am I hearing that right? Like that's
Oh,
how I'm
absolutely.
translating that
Absolutely.
in this space of thinking about this in terms of, it doesn't sound like what a lot of people would do in business, but I think you're onto something very critical there. If you get your managers right, and you mentioned Gallup a couple minutes ago, and what does Gallup research tell us? I think they know a thing or two, and they're pretty,
No, absolutely.
70%, 70% of a person's variance in performance is tied to the person who is their manager. So the difference between being an A and an F is on the boss.
Pretty significant.
That is why Mr. Keith Willis is right when he shares here today on Nuggets with Sauce that you start with, if you have no other way to spend the money on learning and development, you start with your managers. Love that. Tell us more. Just
Yeah, because here's the thing: when you start with your managers, whatever you're doing, ultimately they're the ones that have responsibility for coaching,
yeah.
feedback, even delegation. Delegation is one of the best development tools that money can buy, because all the manager is doing is pushing a portion of their job down to their direct report. They're involved, they're helping to develop that person, put them in a position to be able to take on more responsibility within the organization. So everything the manager does is so important. And you've heard that saying, the most important relationship that somebody has in an organization is with their manager.
Mhm.
So it would make sense to spend more money on training managers versus not. And here's the thing that's very interesting. So organizations struggle with, do I hire somebody from outside of the company?
Mhm.
Because they make an assumption that that person has management skills that they picked up from somebody else.
Well,
Well,
they're
the
going to come
downside,
pre-programmed. See, we didn't do any management, anything here. So I'm hoping if I get somebody off the street, they come pre-programmed with management, right? I just got
yeah.
to offload that. I know where this is headed. I see.
Yeah. And then they don't fit culturally sometimes.
Right, right. No, I mean, oh my God, there's so many nuggets in this basket right now. I mean, if I can step back for just a sec, the delegating thing is a very interesting point that you raised too. Because what's the opposite of the manager who's good at delegating?
Usually a micromanager.
The micromanager. And how much do we love our micromanagers?
We
Not at
hate them.
all, right? And how exhausting to be that micromanager. Because to me, you tell me, but to me, that's like, now I lack trust. I don't trust this person to take this on. I haven't developed them enough to take, which is why I don't trust them. Like I haven't set my people up for success for me to hand something over. That's a heck of a workload.
Yeah, and some of it is because some managers, they only know what they did when they were in that previous role. So they continue those behaviors.
Wait, you mean what I used to do before I became a manager isn't going to make me a great manager? Stop.
Absolutely not.
Yeah, rocking a spreadsheet doesn't make somebody manager.
Right. You're no longer an individual contributor.
Right, but they never get that mindset. Again, because nobody has stepped aside and said, hey, this is a very different role. you can't, literally what you used to do isn't going to help you now. And yet we haven't put any, I like to call it tools in the toolbox. These poor managers, nobody puts tools in their toolbox to say, or maybe they get one, like, oh, now I got a hammer, so I'm looking for nothing but nails. Right?
You see the trend? You see the trend because their manager is not coaching and giving them feedback.
Right, sure. Well,
So,
but
so
legend is a great way to make managers. Like everything
yeah.
I learned from so-and-so over there who was a complete crank. Yeah. It, like you're saying, it rolls down, right? Like we're gonna perpetuate these habits and these mistakes, right? If this is how we've always done it, I don't know how else to do it. We are going to create, dare I say, in a manner of speaking, generations of workers. And a generation of workers these days could be a tenure as short as 6 months.
Yeah.
But it's just going to keep replicating, yeah?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and expensive, like as you're saying too, like the manager is it's the make or break role for most people, I think. And we also know that therefore, who does somebody quit when they're not really quitting their job, they're not really quitting the company, they're quitting the manager. I mean, I myself have quit either the manager or the management at least 3 times in my career. You?
Yeah, I've been in organizations where the manager that you're leaving, because sometimes you made a decision you're going to leave, and it may be 6 or 8 months later, and I've said to myself, gee, I wish I was giving this resignation to my old manager because that's why I'm leaving.
Well, one of the best exit, if anybody's doing exit interviews, but one of the best questions I ever ran across, and I think it's worth sharing it in context of hey, am I going to quit my manager? The question to always be asked is, when did you first think about quitting or leaving, and why? And how often might that trace to a manager or a leader or something that a manager or leader had a hand in, or maybe lacked having a hand in, that made for an environment that led to a decision? And as you said at the very beginning, this is all about talent. Who can afford to lose good talent? And by the way, would you agree or disagree with me, Keith, that usually it is your better talent who tends to quit and leave and walk away from these managers that don't know what they're doing?
Oh yeah. So here's something that's interesting. I tell people one way to figure out how your management's doing is short-term disability. I didn't realize that short-term disability was a thing, but I would talk to people that were top performers and they go out on short-term disability and they'd be sick. I remember somebody that I brought into the home office as a trainer, and we were having a conversation, and I had left the company by then. They would complain about these headaches that they would get. They would get these headaches and they were going to the doctor. They were trying to figure out what was going on. And so finally they put 2 and 2 together and figured out it was their job. Now, in this case, I don't think they went on short-term disability, but they ended up leaving the organization. And guess what? The headaches went away. And another person,
Surprise, surprise.
surprise.
Yeah.
They were having issues back and forth to the doctor, stress related, went on short-term disability. Shortly thereafter, when they came back, left the organization, all of their health problems went away. And that was when I realized that short-term disability could be a marker. Now, that's not to say that at times that people don't really have an illness, because they do. But there are other times that when people are on short-term disability, it's because the job is literally making them sick.
Right. And maybe if they don't get quite as far, quite as severe as actually needing to take that disability leave, take a look at your sick days. Take a look at what it's costing. And let's go one step further. Let's be detectives, and let's also dig in and pay a little bit of attention. Are there any patterns around? There seem to be a lot of sick days or, short-term disabilities. Is there a pattern in terms of like, wow, we have a lot of sick days over in this department, or we have, twice as many call outs in this team that we do in any way, because that can also lead us to, to help us diagnose some of these things. And by the way, I think it's pretty stressful on those managers and those leaders. They don't know what the hell they're doing. It's not really their fault. I mean, sure, there's the odd person who gets up in the morning, whoa, how do I'm miserable today? But I think most of them are like, it's kind of not their fault. Back to our point of, are you training, are you spending any money in training these people? Are you helping them know how to do the job so they don't literally, I can really relate. I remember being in a situation where I was getting ill from stress from work. I understand.
Oh yeah, I had it. I had that. I had a job where I told my wife if I don't leave this company, this job's gonna kill me.
Yeah. Yeah. And and these days when there's so much chatter out there around, and rightfully so, a lot of concern around, mental health in the workspace. The whole thing about burnout's been a big topic. People are very anxiety ridden. They feel that they're very stressed. It's very hard, and we go back to what you said earlier. So where's the engagement? We have crappy low engagement in part because of these these are all tied together. It's a good thing you worked in pharma and healthcare, because I can see literally the connectivity all over the place, right? Like these things don't happen in a vacuum, do they?
Here's the thing that's interesting too, because pharma does probably more training than most industries. Uh, Most managers go through some type of management training. I will say that in some cases it's delayed. Manager may be a manager for 6 months before they go to training. So sometimes that can be difficult.
Yeah,
I've
that's the deep
seen,
end of the pool before asking if you like swimming event, but no, at
yeah,
least they eventually get it sooner or later. A lifeline.
yeah.
Yeah,
But by then, sometimes the damage is done,
yeah, yeah.
or leadership development stays open.
Mhm.
No one fills that position after someone gets promoted, maybe after, maybe it takes a
Mhm.
year and a half. I mean, and
Yeah,
so what does that say for the managers as
right.
far as how important development is? And what does that
Well,
say for the people?
and that's another nugget I know you and I have talked about before too, and we're very much on the same page. It's okay, it's one thing to just have the base, let's basically train these people. Like, let's make sure that, as I like to say, put tools in their toolboxes. But then the other piece about that is it's not gonna, okay, just you're not just again gonna throw the book at them or whatever and say, okay, now we've given you some tools in your toolbox. Okay, but there's a lot of different things you could do with that. So let's talk a little bit, because I know this is another passion point for you around, and we've just touched on it, but let's dig further. The development aspect of, like, it's not enough to just, okay, I trained you, I checked the box, congratulations, you're trained. We got to think about each individual and those people who are in those responsible leadership spaces, and how do we hone in and develop them further? What are your thoughts around that, Keith?
Yeah, so I think it's a key piece. I think that managers have to have conversations with their people on a regular basis.
Mhm.
Obviously, if you're doing one-on-ones, you have check-ins throughout the year, you have mid-years, and sometimes you just need to sit down and have a conversation about where somebody is, what their aspirations are, where they want to go in their career.
Mhm.
Figure out, are there some areas that, they're very strong in that they can leverage and develop, or are there some areas that maybe they're weak in that they have some strengths that they can work around?
Yeah.
Uh, you
Don't
know,
go home and cry. Let's find that. No, really, like it could be down to something like where do you want, what do you
yeah.
love, what do you hate? What could I maybe do more to give you what you love and less of what you hate? I mean, it really could be. I mean, I'm not saying we would couch it in these terms, that like what would make somebody go home and cry at the end of the day?
Yeah, because maybe they don't like what they're doing, or maybe the project that you have them on, they struggle with. Maybe, and so it's having conversations about, what's the perfect day at work for you? What does that look like?
What a great question. What would a perfect day at work look like for you? And you know what I'm willing to bet too, in spite of all the chatter out there about people don't want to work, I bet most people wouldn't answer, I just want to be sitting on a beach with a glass in my hand. I mean, okay, we know, but let's get down to brass tacks of really like, okay, if we can't give you that, you got to get your butt in the door over here. It is an excellent question people should be, asking. And dare I say, maybe the managers themselves should also be self-evaluating that and saying, what
Well,
does my ideal workday look like?
well, their manager should be asking them the same question.
Right.
I mean,
All the way up.
ultimately, the manager gets poured on all the time. I mean, in some ways, if you think about it, everybody complains about them.
Yeah.
They're the go-between senior management and their teams.
Yeah.
So, the expectation is that they're going to do everything. It used to be that there was a lot more support. Now the manager has to do that. Imagine doing a staff meeting, you do all the setup, you do this, you do that, you do the other. You're trying to run interference for your people. So the responsibility can be a lot. And it's one of the reasons why when you talk to people that look at their managers, oftentimes they say, I don't think I want to sign up for that. So
I saw something about
yeah,
recently where there's a new trend, there's a trending indicator right now that says there's a lot of people who simply they see promotion as punishment because it has been punishment for so long. Because nugget number one, we're back to nobody spending the time and the dime to train the manager. So why would I want to step into a thankless task where nobody's going to help me?
exactly.
No thanks.
Exactly.
I'll just stay over here quietly chugging away.
And if you think about it, management training should happen before somebody becomes a manager.
Oh, yes. Oh, see, this is why I so love these conversations with you, Keith, because we are definitely simpatico around that. Yeah, like you don't throw somebody in the deep end of the pool and then say, do you like water? Which is what we do with most managers, right? Like
Yeah,
I really feel, and I'm sure you feel the same way. It's also a great opportunity to let somebody self-select out. You don't have to tell them they're necessarily not management material. You also get the opportunity, because what do people think when they're going, I want to be a manager? I remember working in a place where like, oh, manager was like this magic word. Everybody wanted to be a manager. And nobody really stopped. And why was that? What was it about being manager, which I think is a good question to ask. Why do you want to be a manager? What do you think that means? And yeah,
yeah. People like the perks. I
for
think there's
sure.
a perception there were a lot of perks and things, and
Right.
maybe get a parking space,
Mm.
get a cool office. It's interesting now because a lot of the things that were considered perks are gone now. Offices are gone. You're in open space. In
With the
some
money,
cases,
maybe it's just
yeah,
about
money.
the
Yeah,
money and the power. Maybe,
maybe. In
maybe.
some cases, if you're in sales, sometimes the reps are making more than the manager.
Well, what a perfect way to ruin your best salesperson is to turn them into a manager when that's not what they want. Because actually, yeah, I'm sure for a lot of them, where it really hurts them is all of a sudden all those commissions or all those bonuses or those extra things that were tied to their sales performance, that's gone.
Yeah. And then imagine, so their team is responsible for their bonus. So
Mhm.
is it a wonder that you have hero sales managers? I'm going to save every deal.
Yeah.
They don't know how to coach and give feedback.
Which is
They don't know
back
how to
to
sell.
we're not going to delegate anything. So I've got
Yep.
to do 10 jobs and become probably a rather unlikable human being in the process because they're so maniacal about, they're not allowed to make mistakes. They're not allowed to fall flat. They're supposed to be all and know all, and it's impossible. I mean, it's hard. Yeah. So I love the idea as well in the space of like, get them before you give them the title.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it, like if we were talking doctors, like, and again, you've worked in the medical professionals, but it's like, how would this fly if we said, oh, Keith, that's wonderful. You want to be a surgeon, and I'm all for that. So I'll tell you what, start being a surgeon now. We'll figure it out as we go. Go ahead and start doing surgery, and let's see what you got. And I'm sure you're fine. And then if you need a little, touch up around the edges, we'll figure something out for you.
Yeah, we'd be in trouble. So it's
Right.
interesting because even in the military, becoming an officer, you go through a lot of because I did 4 years ROTC. A lot of what I learned in ROTC I use as an officer. And then you go to your officer basic course, which is 6 months. So before you get to your first duty station, you've already had 6 months of training.
That's a lot of training. And I'm sure it's very intensive too.
Yeah, it's just like an extra semester of college.
Hey, but for all the right reasons.
Well, it's master's level stuff. I
Yeah.
mean, I will say that there were people that were in class that were going to get their masters for some of the work that we did. They got credit. And we did a whole marketing thing around shoe boxes.
Military dollars that you didn't know were being spent, but I'm sure it was for a good reason, but again, it's like, hey, these are, we've got to build out these skill sets. We've got to put these tools in the toolboxes, because there is that spin that comes down from that says, the better prepared our top leaders are to be
Yep.
leaders, the better they prepare the managers who, as you said, these are people who are tasked with, they're the keystone. It's like when you have an arch, the keystone's the one stone in the middle that if you don't put that stone in place, the arch falls apart.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
they're beholden to like executive level, whatever your organization is, like the people at the top are pushing this stuff down on the managers to say, push this down on your people, while there's pressure building from the bottom up on they are squeezed in the middle.
Yeah.
And if you don't get those folks right, I don't care what great ideas you've got up in the corner office or wherever you're sitting, it's never going to fly unless you have your managers well oiled, well prepared, well versed to be able to translate that and get their teams to execute on it.
So yeah, so at the end of the day, I think it's not only more training for managers, it just means more time spent with managers preparing them. Even things like change management.
Oh
You know,
yeah,
yeah, think about all the changes that go on in an organization
sure.
and how unprepared managers are
Right.
oftentimes to implement those changes.
Don't know how to do that. Decision making is tough. Like, how do we get some better, faster, more informed decisions? They can often, stall out there. Even just like being able to know how to, engage, motivate, and show appreciation. I mean, a lot of managers, I'm sure, don't even recognize that, like, actually people do want to be thanked. And they do want to be noticed, like, shocking. I know it's not always the heavy duty stuff, it can be the little things that add up, that, how many people go in every day and just go like, man, I don't feel like anybody notices what I'm doing around here. Nobody cares. My
Well,
manager, my boss doesn't care.
yeah, now you know why people want to work virtually.
Right, right. Or again, it's not that they don't want to work, it's that they don't want to work in environments where leaders aren't really leading, managers aren't really managing, and they're not, it all rolls downhill.
Yeah, exactly. You make an interesting point because when you go into an organization that has a very, very vibrant culture, you can tell
Mhm.
there's an energy about the place. There's a feeling about, wow, this looks like some place that people want to be.
Yeah,
And places that don't, it's the same feeling. You can tell when it's a place that people don't want to be. So it goes both ways. Strong
yeah.
leadership makes it an exciting place to work.
Right. Right. Or pockets therein. Like maybe the overall stuff is kind of okay, but we've all seen situations like this too, where like things are very different over in that part of the building, like
Yeah.
that team or that department in one of two flavors. It's either like everybody would love, like, look what they're doing over there in the IT environment. Like there is some magic going on in this IT group. Take a look at who's leading that, who's managing that, who's leading that, because those subcultures within organizations are usually very correlated as well.
Oh yeah. And the talent magnets.
Yeah, they are. And then some people are like, what's the talent repellers? Like, look at your turnover. Does your turnover occur in certain departments or certain roles or certain areas of the organization? That's got to be tied back to people are going to quit their managers. People are, there's going to be quit rates that may be higher. It's not going to be evenly distributed across the organization.
Oh
Big
yeah.
indicator.
Oh yeah. Big indicator.
Yeah, I mean, you got to watch for that kind of stuff. And again, I always say, like, we measure what matters. Why aren't we looking at this stuff and measuring some of this in our organizations and saying, like, it's back to what you said at the beginning. This is about talent. And we've got to, as leaders in organizations, think a lot more about the data around our talent and start looking for patterns and trends and measures that will help us figure out, and again, if you're on those tight budgets around your learning and development, okay, then where are you going to get your best result? You're not going to know that if you're not paying attention to the numbers. What's going on with your talent?
Yeah. And I wonder how many people look at those numbers. I mean, I know everybody looks at engagement scores if you do engagement.
If you do anything around engagement.
Yeah, but it's all of the data points. It's the turnover, it's the disability, it's it's there's a list of things to be looked at. And is there a story around it? Do you have a lot of HR issues? Do you have a lot of people on performance plans? When you get to performance reviews, is it a bell curve? Is everybody slanted to the right?
Right.
Because the lack of our inability to give candid feedback about where people really are things overinflated or are they underinflated where maybe too many people are on the low end?
Yeah. Where are there fires that you keep having to put out, or somebody in your organization, HR is putting out fires? Or where do you need to light a fire, so to speak? It's like, it's one of those indicators, right? There's either too much of something going on that we don't want, let's watch for that, or there's not enough of something happening over here. Like, where are you guys?
Yeah, because all turnover is not bad.
No, that's very true. But turnover for all the wrong reasons. When your top talent is finding the exit,
that's a problem.
That's a problem. And if the first, again, if the answer to the question is when did you first start thinking about leaving and why, and it somehow comes back to something that person's manager could have been doing differently or better, we want to pay attention to that. That was an avoidable reason for an exit. Absolutely. And then you're back to square one where you're trying to bring back in more talent and,
the hiring process. And have you trained your managers to do recruiting and selection?
Oh, wait, what? Yeah, like right back. Yeah, when you think of that full life cycle, that's going to have to be a whole other conversation. That's going to be a fabulous one because there is a lot to be said for when you think of your full life cycle of an employee. Right away, one of the things you've got to be asking yourself is, does a hiring manager even know how to get the right talent in the door in the first place?
Yeah. So there's a podcast I listen to, Manager Tools, and so Mark Horstman calls it the Christmas tree, the Horstman Christmas tree rule, which basically is anytime there's something that you don't do that often, usually you're not very good at it.
Right. Love that. Well, we're going to have to unpack more of this in some future and further conversations, because I think you have shared some tremendous nuggets here today. We can deep dive into any one of them, and I know we've got some more pipelined here as well that we're going to talk about. So, Keith, thank you so much for joining me today. Love what you're sharing in this space. Love what you're doing. We are going to continue to fight the good fight to say that, we really do need to invest in what we're doing with our managers if we're going to move the dial.
Thanks so much, Michelle. Appreciate you having me on.
All right. Fantastic. Thanks for joining this episode of Nuggets with Sauce. I hope we fed your appetite for insights and information on how to improve your business. Be sure to like and subscribe so you never go hungry for more thought leadership.